Escape from Kampala. The year was 1979, and Kampala was trembling under the thunder of advancing Tanzanian forces and Ugandan exiles. For years, Idi Amin had ruled the nation with an iron fist, his voice echoing through radio broadcasts, his image plastered across streets and offices. But now, the empire he had built with brutality and fear was crumbling. Shells exploded across the suburbs of Mulago, Wandageya, and Kibuye. The city was suffocating under smoke and the stench of blood. Roads to the west were sealed. Yoweri Museveni's Fronasa fighters were meant to block the Gulu-Arua highway, but arrived late. The northern route was gone. The Tanzanians closed in tighter each hour. Kampala had become a trap. And at its center, Amin sat besieged in his beloved Cape Town villa near Luzira, a fortress overlooking Lake Victoria. The soldiers who once cheered him now melted into shadows. The thud of mortars shook the walls. A curfew had emptied the skies, yet one helicopter braved the Tanzanian fire, swooping low across the waters. Witnesses at Luzira barracks watched as it landed at Amin's villa, its rotors cutting through the smoke-filled evening. A few minutes later, it rose again, carrying the president who had styled himself as Lord of all the beasts of the earth and fishes of the sea. He left Kampala less than 8 hours before it fell on April 11, 1979. Soldiers later recalled seeing Tanzanians firing at the chopper from Muyenga Hill, their bullets slicing through air but missing their mark. The man who once claimed to be uncapturable vanished into the eastern horizon, leaving behind a city in flames. Libya, the friend's embrace. His first refuge was Libya, where Colonel Muammar Gaddafi welcomed him like a brother. The two had long been bound by mutual admiration and theatrics. Gaddafi admired Amin's flamboyant defiance of the West, and Amin saw in Gaddafi a kindred revolutionary spirit. Tripoli gave Amin sanctuary. He lived in guarded villas, entertained with feasts, and occasionally appeared in Libyan press as a guest of honor. Yet beneath the surface, exile gnawed at him. Uganda was gone. His voice over Radio Uganda was silent. He paced the halls of his residence, dreaming of return, dictating speeches no one heard. Sometimes he would gather his children and tell them, "Papa will return to Uganda. The people wait for me." But even his children, though loyal, saw in his eyes a desperation that betrayed doubt. For Gaddafi, Amin became a burden. Internationally isolated, Amin's presence complicated Libya's relations with African neighbors. Over time, Gaddafi suggested a quieter exile, and so Amin packed his belongings and moved once more, this time to Iraq. Iraq, the silent years. In Baghdad, Amin found refuge under Saddam Hussein. Iraq was at war's edge, but its leader saw value in protecting another strongman. Yet unlike Libya, Iraq offered Amin no stage. Here, the once boisterous dictator faded into obscurity. He grew heavier, slower, and quieter. His appearances dwindled. Amin's life in Iraq was marked by long days of silence. He haunted palace gardens, recalling the days when thousands trembled at his command. Occasionally, Ugandan exiles whispered rumors of his return, but no army gathered. Amin himself seemed torn between fantasy and resignation. In private moments, he scribbled notes in Swahili and Luganda, sometimes breaking into laughter, sometimes sighing. Iraq gave him shelter, but not identity. Eventually, Saddam too suggested a more permanent exile. By the mid-1980s, Amin was flown to Saudi Arabia. The man who once dreamed of ruling Africa now prepared for his last chapter in a land far from the Nile, far from Uganda, far from the drums of power. Saudi Arabia, the final refuge. Jeddah became Amin's prison and sanctuary. The Saudi monarchy, respectful of Islamic Brotherhood, gave him asylum under strict conditions. No politics, no interviews, no plots to return. He received a villa, bodyguards, and a stipend that ensured comfort but not extravagance. Neighbors in Jeddah whispered about him. Some saw him walking slowly to the mosque, surrounded by children. Others noticed his bulk, his frame now consumed by age and illness. To many in Saudi Arabia, he was a curiosity, an aging man with a past too heavy to name. In his villa, Amin lived with his wives and children. He prayed 5 times a day. He grew fond of teaching Quran to his younger children. His booming laugh still erupted on good days, but the weight of diabetes and hypertension dimmed his vigor. Ugandans who visited him in exile described a man half proud, half broken. He insisted he had been misunderstood, that Western media painted him falsely. Yet his eyes betrayed something else, a loneliness, perhaps even regret. The hospital and the nurse. In July 2003, Amin's health collapsed. His kidneys failed, his body swelled, and his breath grew shallow. He was admitted to King Faisal Specialist Hospital in Jeddah. Doctors placed him on life support, conducting dialysis. Among the nurses assigned to him was Vasanti Makwana, a Canadian of Indian descent. For her, the encounter was nothing short of surreal. She was one of the thousands of Asians Amin had expelled from Uganda in 1972, uprooting her family in an act that scarred generations. The first time she saw him wheeled into her unit, her heart pounded. The monster of her childhood, the man who had shattered her home, was lying helpless on a stretcher. His once commanding eyes were weary, his body bloated, his voice reduced to whispers. "Please help me. I am a very sick man," Amin pleaded. Vasanti, torn between anger and duty, replied softly, "Yes, sir, we will help you." Later, she found the courage to confront him. Open quote, "I am one of those Asians you expelled. My father never forgave you. He loved Uganda. It was our home." Close quote. Amin looked at her with wide, tired eyes. She saw something flicker there. Acknowledgement, perhaps shame. For her, it was a moment of release, a weight lifted after decades. For him, it was one more reckoning with ghosts he could no longer silence. The last words. As days passed, his condition worsened. His wives kept vigil at his bedside, and his children wept quietly. In one moment of clarity, Amin turned to them and whispered in Swahili, "Watoto wangu, kuweni pamoja." My children, remain together. These words, simple, unadorned, were his last command. Not about power, not about Uganda, not about glory, only about unity in his family. It was a stunning contrast to the years he had spent dividing and destroying others. The death of Idi Amin. On August 16, 2003, Idi Amin Dada died in Jeddah. He was 78. The man who once terrorized Uganda, who called himself Conqueror, who strutted in medals and uniforms, was gone. His passing was quiet, almost unremarkable. No gun salutes, no national mourning. Just silence. News spread quickly. In Uganda, reactions were divided. Some mourned, others rejoiced. Survivors of his regime wept with memories of torture and disappearances. His supporters spoke of him as a nationalist. Newspapers called him Uganda's butcher. But in Jeddah, the focus was not politics, it was burial. The burial scene. Islamic tradition demands swift burial. Within hours, Amin's body, wrapped in white shrouds, was prepared. There was no coffin, no state flag, no medals. His family gathered, along with a handful of Saudi officials tasked with overseeing the rites. The sun burned above Ruwais Cemetery. The air carried the scent of sand and salt from the Red Sea. His body was lowered into the earth quietly. Prayers were recited. His children sobbed. One of his sons, Hussein Amin, said softly, "Papa, rest." His wives clutched each other, weeping. The Saudi imam leading the prayer spoke no grand words, only the standard verses of Janazah prayer. The crowd was small, perhaps 30 people in total. No heads of state, no generals, no ministers. And then the earth swallowed him. The man who once filled stadiums with soldiers and parades was gone, resting in an unmarked grave. Reflections. For many, Amin's burial symbolized the irony of power. He had strutted across Africa, declared himself conqueror, executed enemies, expelled entire communities. Yet in the end, he was buried like any ordinary man, far from home, forgotten by the world. For his children, it was the loss of a father, flawed, feared, yet still theirs. For Ugandans, it was the closing of a dark chapter. For history, it was a lesson that even monsters die quietly, and the soil makes no distinction between king and commoner.